Hey guys, welcome to another MTG Steam Brewery deck tech. This is over the modern Grixis Midrange deck I've been playing in our recent meta. It's very tuned for our meta, as you can tell by several of the cards in the main deck, and I'll just go and get right into it. We start with our threats. We have 2 Tasker, the Golden Fang. I think he's more than proven his powerhouse, that he's a powerhouse of a card, not only in Standard but in Modern Legacy. He's very powerful. As with every non-green, black, blue deck, every non-Sultai deck, we can only activate them off of our blue mana, so that we do need to be aware of that when fetching your lands. If you want to be activating Tasker, you'll need quite a bit of blue mana. Luckily, the mana base is built to support that, so yeah. And he's also just super cheap, super efficient, 4/5. He works very well with Grim Lavamancer late in the game. You can keep milling and then cast the chaff that they keep giving back to you in the Delverless way, and eventually they'll have to start giving you good things, or maybe you'll just get a little bit of luck and only be getting good things anyway. But he's just a super cheap, super efficient 4/5 in this kind of deck. 1 Thundermahel Kite, because this card is awesome, and I like this card a lot in red decks and Modern that aren't super low to the ground. I think it's a very nice top end. In this deck it is the top of the curve, because Tasker is not really a 6-drop. Unless your graveyard is like 6 awesome spells that you want to keep in there, and getting any of them back would be awesome. But Thundermahel Kite, 5 mana, 5/5 Flying Haste, kills Lingering Souls tokens, can tap down flying blockers. It's a very powerful card. And as can often be the case, it can just be a 5/5 flyer haster that doesn't do anything else. But that's still good enough to kill your opponent a fair amount of time, because it will dodge Abrupt Decay, it will dodge Bolt, dodges a fair amount of removal at instant speed that are seeing play in my meta right now, so definitely very powerful. And then Duskmancer, a card of my choice. It is Dark Confidant for both players on your upkeep, not both players, just your upkeep. You will both do it. He's also a 4/4 flyer, so he dodges Abrupt Decay and Lightning Bolt, as I mentioned. So he's a very powerful card. Hold on. I feel a little funny, guys, so please bear with me as I try to work through this deck tech. But he's a very powerful card. He's won me many games. He's lost me a few, but most of those games I would be losing if I played anything that wasn't him anyway. In that slot, say it was just 4 Delvers or something, I wouldn't have been winning that game anyway. So, he's not terrible. He's actually done pretty well for me, and I think he's a very powerful card that is worth playing. We have 1 of Annealing Click. There should probably be a second one in here somewhere. I'm kind of just changing around the numbers. I recently added the second Tasker to see how that goes. I'm testing with the Fulminator Mage and a Annealing Click split, just kind of working on the creature base of the deck. The spell base is pretty much where I want it for my current Modern meta, though it's changing a little, so I'll probably have to change that too soon. But right now, this is probably the best creature I can have in this deck, as far as like an efficient threat for the strategy. Having a flash threat that I can play while holding up counter spells and removal spells, while also being able to get information from my opponent's hand and take a card that might be problematic for me, or just take their best card to give them a worse hand, can be very nice. And having 3 flying power is not irrelevant, even in Modern. There are plenty of efficient flyers, and this is one of them. Can close the game out quickly, because not every deck is going to have a ton of flyers. There's 1 Fulminator Mage. Just testing this out with the 2 Kogan's Command in the main decks and 1 on the board. I decided that I might want to test it. In our Modern meta, if your opponent stumbles, like at least where I am, there's a bunch of 3-color decks or people trying to kill you with like Ink Moss and Blink Moss, just trying to kill you with some non-basic lands. So Fulminator Mage isn't terrible to have anyway. And then if my opponent's stumbling on mana, I can punish them for it even harder than this deck normally would be able to. With Fulminator Mage, especially with Kogan's Command to like return it to my hand and then cast it again. It's also just kind of an efficient card. 3 mana 2/2 is not the terrible rate. Will be able to turn sideways before you need to crack it, and killing man lands is always nice. 4 Young Pyromancer are probably just the best creature in the deck, if not in any kind of deck that's playing more than, I'd say, 18 sorceries in the deck. If you're playing like 18 or more, you probably want this card in your deck if you're in red, in Modern anyway, just because of how efficient the spells are, how cheap they are. And after playing Young Pyromancer on turn 2, most times if I get to untap with it, the game will be over, as like if they don't have an answer to it right away. It can run away with the game, much like Lingering Souls can. And that's kind of true for any red deck in Modern that's playing Young Pyromancer. It can just kind of run away with the game, which kind of really speaks to the power that this card is powerful enough that even though Abrupt Decay is super huge in Modern right now, Young Pyromancer is still probably one of the best things you can be doing in this kind of strategy, even though he's so soft to it. And then there's 2 Grim Lavamancer, just a nice, cheap, efficient threat. It's very powerful against Affinity, against cheap, low-to-the-ground creature decks that aren't Zoo, because most of their things will have 3 toughness. But he's very nice, great against Infect as well as he can, over the course of the game, once again help with Tasker, but he can also kill your opponent as the game goes on between your burn spells, because he does also burn creatures and players. So, just a nice, cheap, efficient card to be playing otherwise. Then there's only 2 Serum Regions in the deck, since I am not playing Delvers in this deck. I cut them from the list. This was originally a Grixis Delver deck, but I just didn't like it, the Delvers and the way I configured the deck, so I ended up cutting them, and Serum Visions has just been a 2 of, just because it is a very efficient card, but without Delver there's no real need to be playing for it, because we don't really want to be manipulating our deck that much the way my modern meta is right now. Once again, the meta is shifting. People are kind of reverting backwards from the way they've been going, so it might be about time to go back up to 4 Serum Visions and change the spell base up, but for now, just the 2. There's also 1 Electrolyze in the deck. For those of you who can't read Russian, it deals 2 damage provided you choose among any number of target creatures and or players, and you draw a card at instant speed. Very nice, very efficient. Answers half of Lingering Souls, and a Remand can answer the other half. Good against, amazing against Affinity. Nice against small creature decks, can kill Bird's Paradise, or like a Bird's Paradise and a Persistent Kitchen Sphinx. It's always also not terrible when you can just have to deal 2 damage to your opponent, draw a card. Also not the worst. And there's 2 Kogan's Commands. This card is amazing. It's quickly been climbing in price. If you haven't gotten them, I would recommend getting them now. Foils or non-foils, whichever ones you'd rather have. Now is probably the time to get in. If I haven't posted this video up before, they're obscenely expensive. I think they're already $6 for normals. So if you want to get them, $6 is probably the right place to be, because the standard isn't really raising their price. It's modern, where they're seeing a ton of play. And Jund, obviously Grixis Delver, and this deck though may not be quite Grixis Delver, it's very similar. I'll be even putting it in my Mardu deck soon. So definitely a very powerful card you probably want to start getting your hands on. And then there's 1 Grixis Charm. I think this card's very underrated, but not a ton of decks can play this card. Cruel Control, they don't need it. They don't they don't need the creature control get +2/+0 with this deck. We can kill someone out of nowhere with that, especially with Young Pyromancer. They don't really need to bounce things because they have so many efficient removal spells, and their ways to bounce things are normally going to be Cryptic Command. And then the -4/-4, they just have so much efficient removal, they don't need to play those removals. There's 1 Remand and 2 Mana Leak. This is just going to go over our whole counter cap. Just 2 Negate, a Deprive, and then 2 Izzet Charms down the row. As our counter package. I'm main decking the 2 Negates and 1 Dispel as well, as you'll see a little bit here. I'm main decking a Dispel and 2 Negates, just the way our meta's been shifting. People were originally playing Green-Black X decks, and they've been shifting to decks that beat those. So Negate and Dispel have been slowly getting better as people have been just trying to outgrind, and that can be a nice, cheap, efficient counter spell. Remand, just great tempo. Mana Leak, also a great early counter spell. Deprive, I think, is extremely underrated, but once again, not a ton of decks can play a card like that. This is one of the few that can. Grixis Delver is also one, or even just straight Blue-Red Delver, is one of the few decks that can play a card like Deprive, where losing that land isn't going to be a huge deal, because you will be just tempering your opponent. And then we have 2 Terminates, probably just the best removal spell you can be playing right now. If you're in Red and Black in Modern, there's not a... Like, unless your meta's full of, like, the Monastery Esper deck, where they're, like, main decking Blood Baron, Terminate's just going to kill almost everything you need it to kill. You can kill Tarmogoyf, Tassiger, Siege Rhino, I already said Tassiger. You can kill Thundermine Hellkite, so that's the thing in your meta. You can just kill a ton of big creatures that need to die. So, just nice, efficient, and it can't be regenerated clause if Lotleth, Troll, or other sets cards are big in your meta. Just a nice card. Of course, Izzet Charm? It's like a cross between Negate and Mana Leak. It can counter a non-creature spell unless they pay 2, but it also can deal 2 damage, so it's a nice early removal spell against things like Affinity and Infect. And then it's also loot in the late game when you get more than like 6 or 7 lands. You don't need many more lands than that really in this deck. Or if you just kind of need to try and draw something early, it can just be a nice way to just draw 2 cards. Even though you have to discard 2 cards, it's card neutrality, not advantage, you do still get to filter through your deck. Of course, for Lightning Bolt, probably just the most efficient red spell in Modern. For its mana cost, 1 red to deal 3 damage. I think Wizards made it pretty clear they're not going to make anything better than that on any, like, in the foreseeable future. At least that can hit players as well as creatures. That we've seen Flame Slash deals 4 damage, but only to creatures at sorcery speed. Lightning Bolt's probably not going to get any better printings of Lightning Bolt. So even though it's been printed a billion times, I'd still recommend you get your full play set. 1 Vapor Snag. being able to bounce a creature for 1 mana to control losing life. You can use it to save your own creatures. Sometimes bouncing Young Pyromancer, Click, or Thundermire Hellkite is going to be the way to go. But you can also just temper your opponent out. If you've never got to Vapor Snag a Tasker when your opponent delved all the cards out of the graveyard, it feels amazing, especially when you have Young Pyromancer in play, so I recommend you give it a shot if you're playing Blue, and a strategy like this. And then, of course, the One Dispel, as I mentioned, just a nice, cheap, efficient counterspell. And the way my meta's been going, it's the nice way to have right now, but in a couple weeks, it'll probably not be. I'll probably be changing this deck, cutting the Izzet Charms, Negates, and Dispel, having a full 4 Mana Leaks, adding another Vapor Snag, things like that. People are reverting back to Green-Black X decks, and things like Infect, as people are just starting to attack the slower, grindier decks in our meta. With like combo decks and such. And then we have our mana base. 4 Creeping Tar Pit was another reason I cut the Delver on top of the like Thundermire Hellkite Dustmouse here package, because I do not support playing 19 lands and Thundermire Hellkite in your deck. That's just not a good idea. Despite what some people have written in articles, even no matter how many draw spells you have, I don't think you can play 19 lands and 5 drops in your deck and be happy with it when the rest of your deck is like 2 or less, other than maybe 1 or 2 cards. So, in this deck, we don't have that problem. We do want to get all the way up there on our top end, especially when we can use our 4 Creeping Tar Pits and 1 Lava Claw Reaches, though Lava Claw Reaches might need just be a Black Cleave Cliffs. But having 5 manlands is not awful in the slower, grindier matchups where you having manlands can actually just win you the game because your opponent might not be able to answer them. And as you'll notice, I have 8 fetch lands, 8 fetchable lands. Once again, this is where Izzet Charm can be nice. When you no longer have the use for fetch lands, you can just start ditching them because they're dead cards anyway. So there's the main deck for this deck, and I'll see you guys in a second for the sideboard. And welcome back for our sideboard. Let's just go and get right into it. Once again, there are a bunch of slower, grindier decks, and the Abzan matchups, though, they're not awful for this deck. Hold on, as I try to focus this camera. There we go. They're not awful for this deck in Game 1. They can get really rough post-board when they're bringing in things like Maelstrom Pulse and Guard Charm to kill your Young Pyromancer and their tokens. So you do need a bit better of a late game than just having Tasker or Thundermire Hellkite, because they can kill those. So Keranos, a card that's nigh impossible for them to beat unless they have Dromoka's Command in their deck post-board, which would be really strange. Unless they're expecting the card Keranos itself and do not have any other artifacts and enchantments, this is probably a very great card in that matchup otherwise. But if you know they're going to be sideboarding in Dromoka's Command for some odd reason against this kind of a deck, then don't bring it in. But they normally will do that. He'll normally be very good. He's also great against small creature decks, because this deck can just sideboard into a controller version of the deck with a bunch of removal spells. It can also act as a way to kill them if you can handle other creatures, or it can kill your opponent's small creatures if you don't have enough removal spells, as well as just being able to draw extra cards. So very nice, very powerful. So this is a bit of a slower deck. When you're post-board, you can sideboard out a Dustmouse here or two and sideboard in these top-heavy cards like Keranos and Olivia Balderon. Our next card, very great against things like Affinity. Once you get to untap with it, kill tons of small things. Same thing with Infect. And as well as being very great against the Abzan decks as well, because once you get to untap with this, you can ping a Siege Rhino and take it. You can ping a Tasker and take it. You can ping their Goyfs. You can eat their Lingering Souls alive. She's just a very nice, very efficient card for her mana cost, and she flies. So once again, flyers can be very powerful even in Modern, because not everyone is going to be able to block your flyers very efficiently. Without the card Lingering Souls, which this beats. Monastery Siege, very powerful. Normally going to be brought in, once again, against things like Abzan, or your blue or red control kind of strategies. Those are super popular. They're starting to pop up in my meta. Things that target you and your creatures, this can make very difficult for those cards. Even Abrupt Decay will now cost 4 mana to kill something. If you go Young Pyromancer into Monastery Siege, then you can untap with tons of protection and make it really hard for them to fight over anything if they're trying to kill your creatures, because they have to spend so much mana. As well as if you're bringing it in and you don't need to protect your permanents or yourself, you can name cons to help filter through your deck a little faster and draw some extra cards. As well as, I should mention, the main reason this in the sideboard is for the Burn matchup. You name Dragons with this against Burn, Lightning Bolt will now cost 3, Lava Spike will now cost 3. It is a bit slow, but if you play it on turn 3, it can be extremely powerful and buy you a ton of the time that you would need to win the game. There's one Sowing Salt, there's a few Tron decks in our meta, which can be very difficult for this deck to beat after, they assemble Tron, they can just start racing you. As well as against Infect, the matchup can be, not Infect, Affinity. The matchup can be a little rough between their Blink Moth and Ink Moth Nexus. They can really deal some damage out of not only their creatures are going to have to cast, which you're going to have to answer at sorcery speed, preferably with Pillar of Flame, but sometimes you have to use your instant speed removal, or you'll die. Sowing Salt can handle multiple copies of Blink Moth and Ink Moth Nexus to really help with that matchup as the game can go late. As I've played against Affinity many times, the game can go extremely long with the way this deck is. And 2 Pillar of Flame, Kitchen Finks, Voice Rodents are also starting to pop up in our meta. There's Wilted Abzan decks, Green-White Hate Bears, the Collected Company decks, Midrange, or the Collected Company combo decks. Both have popped up. But having Pillar of Flame, just a nice way to kill Voice Rodents, Kitchen Finks, other such things, without having to worry about them again from Eternal Witness, or they're dying and coming back. This just kills it and exiles it. And then 1 Murderous Cut, just because you do need to kill some bigger things with this deck. Tasker, Seadron, and Tarmogoyf, the way my main deck is configured. Though they are not super popular in our meta, they are still very difficult for this deck to deal with. So having ways to kill them can be very nice, as well as this can also just be a cheap removal spell. You can, well, pseudo-cheap. You do need some cards in your graveyard, but it can be a removal spell post-board when you do need removal spells against decks like Affinity and Infect. Twin even, because it can cost like as little as 1 mana. And then another Kulgan's Command. This card is just so powerful. You won't want it in every matchup, but a lot of the times, like making your opponent discard instant speed can matter. Returning creatures from your graveyard to your hand against decks like, once again, Abzan, as that's starting to rise in popularity again. Jund, any Green-Black X, Sultai, those kind of strategies. Once again, great against Affinity, great against Infect, great against a bunch of small creature decks, and then grindier decks, just because all the modes are going to matter. Now, if things like Living End and Tron are super popular, this is probably not very great against those decks in your meta, and you probably won't need a 3rd one in your sideboard. But right now, Kulgan's Command, 3rd one in my sideboard is pretty good. Another Negate, just another cheap counter spell, not much need to explain that. 1 Combust, a way to uncounterably kill twin combo piece if they try to put a Splinter Twin on it, so you don't die. It's also nice and cheap against things like Hate Bears. It can kill Thalias, it can kill other such things that are just kind of annoying for you to have to deal with, and it's just, the damage can't be prevented, can't be countered. No, like, Brave the Element shenanigans can save it, so just nice. Guess Verdicts, because Bogles does pop up in the meta every once in a while, and that matchup can be very difficult if you've never had to play it. So having a way to kill their big giant creature can be very nice late in the game. Hopefully. Hopefully you can kill the Dryad Arbor or Core Spirit Dancer if they try to sack that instead. Or try to get to where they can sack it instead, and then Guess Verdict can hopefully kill their big creature, stop a Daybreak Coronet, and allow you to win the game. 1 Rakdos Charm has some graveyard hate. It also destroys artifacts, and the dealing damage to players can matter sometimes. There are some times where you won't win, but you can draw the game with this without having to go to time, so you'll have to play another game. That's what happens if you draw the game itself in the middle of like game 3. You'd have to play a 4th game, which normally will never come up, but it might one day, so that might be something to keep aware of. So just a nice little piece of graveyard hate that some other modes. 1 more Terminate. Once again, it's the same thing as Murderous Cut, just another cheap, efficient removal spell. This is locked in 2 mana, and it's just efficient. Murderous Cut, just also nice as another versatile option. Say your opponent plays out and names red. They'd probably name black, but if they happen to name red, so you couldn't like bolt, electrolyze or something, you still have access to Murderous Cut. Just a nice little split there. And then 1 Nihil Spellbomb as pure graveyard hate, as there are a few graveyard decks in our meta. It also draws a card. It's much like Relic of Progenitus, except it will only hit your opponent's graveyard instead. So, it's very nice, just cheap, efficient graveyard hate card. And there's the way the sideboard is right now. It might change if I continue on this deck over the next couple weeks, as I try to focus the camera again. Sorry, guys. But that was all for this week's deck tech. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, just post in the comments. If your comment is Duskman's here is awful while you're playing that card, I just think it's a really good card. I've been told that many times, but I've also destroyed many people with that when they've been saying that, and they can't seem to beat it 9 times out of 10. So, I've just had lots of really good testing with the card Duskman's here. You do have to sideboard it out sometimes, just because of the way it is. Like, sometimes you sideboard out Dark Confidant, that doesn't make it a bad card. This is just a bit of a slower Dark Confidant that's notably bigger. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's deck tech and the weirdness that I brought with it, and I'll see you guys next time.